I found out yesterday that I am in charge of all of it and have to
Oh,
build balloon arches and
have you ever
decorate.
built balloon arches?
No, but my friend and
Oh my
colleague
god.
Wilma has. So
Oh,
she's been running around. There's still a helium shortage. She's been running around all day
wait
today
a
finding
second,
that.
there's still a helium
Yeah, there's
shortage?
been a helium shortage for like a year. Yeah,
Why? Where's it all going?
I don't up in the air. I don't know. It's all this hot air we're burning on this
I
podcast.
guess.
We
Wow,
have
I did
we have
not know that.
single-handedly we're the butterfly effect that caused the helium shortage because I think it kicked in when we started this podcast.
Wow, I did not know that.
Mhm.
'Cause normally
So
you go to the grocery store and they're just handing out helium left and right.
right, you can still get some at the dollar store, but if you need, like, a full tank for a
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
So here's something did you know Saturday was International Kitten Day? 1.
I did.
You did. How did you celebrate?
I
Did you
didn't
cuddle with a
'cause
kitten and
no, because my kittens
mm,
are dead.
okay, um, alright, well, I
But
saw
I
this.
did hang in there. I
Okay,
definitely
thank
hung
you.
in there.
Perfect, and I think that's all they could ask
Yeah.
this year. Have you heard of Acoustic Kitty?
No, I've heard of Jingle Cats.
Different thing. So, I saw reference to this and thought it was a joke and had to go look this up to confirm it. Acoustic Kitty was a CIA project launched in the '60s where they were intending to use cats to spy in the Kremlin and Soviet embassies.
Okay.
In an hour-long procedure, a surgeon would implant a microphone into the cat's ear canal and a
Oh.
radio transmitter at the base of its skull and a thin wire into the fur. It would allow the cat to innocuously record and transmit sound from its surroundings. One, how do you get out the purring?
Right.
Uh, is there like a SoundForge Audacity filter you can throw in there?
True. 2, how
And
do you know that these are the cats they're gonna let in? People are very particular about what cats they like.
that's true. That is very true. So it didn't work out. Um,
Really.
Wikipedia says due to problems with distraction, the cat's sense of hunger had to be addressed in another operation, which is
Wow.
no, I love that nobody thought about that. It cost 20 million to do this.
What?
Yes.
Did they
S
capture, like, sounds of, like, mouse murder?
Well, so the first Acoustic Kitty mission was to eavesdrop on 2 men in a park in Washington, DC, outside the Soviet compound. The cat was let out nearby the park, but was supposedly hit and killed by a taxi almost
No, that
immediately.
sounds terrible. That why I don't wanna hear this story anymore.
But in 2013, I guess the deputy former director of the CIA's Office of Technical Service, who said that the project was abandoned due to the difficulty of training the cat to behave as required, and and quote, "The equipment was taken out of the cat. The cat was re-sewn for a second time and
Mm-mm,
lived a long and happy life afterwards."
mm,
So, I I just apparently again, this is why I love cats and not dogs. They could care less if
yes,
anything about you.
yes,
Um, so one, the fact that no one in the CA was like, "Are kittens really gonna be the thing we wanna stake our whole
right,
operation on here?" Dogs, just anybody, Soviet, American, dogs have no allegiances. Cats, they
right,
will murder for you if you train
100%,
them right.
yes,
And then this sounds like one of those, Men Who Stare at Goats projects
yes.
where they spend all their time trying to move things with their mind, or was it a garden or cigars that they were hoping to get to Castro that was gonna make his beard fall out? This was their whole
Oh,
plan.
I don't think I knew this, but it would have to be cigars, right?
Yeah, or something with the seeds that they would plant into a garden, because the whole theory was that would make, Castro look
Less tough?
not as yeah, less masculine, therefore, he's a subject of derision in his homeland. Uh, didn't really work. sort of a
Clearly.
cigar of pigs kind of thing. So they say project was canceled in 1967. A closing memorandum said that the CIA researchers believed that they could train cats to move short distances. But that, quote, the environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation forced us to conclude that for our intelligence purposes, it would not be practical.
And wait, didn't you say they re-sewed the one up in 2013?
No, this was in 2013. So in sometime in the 60s is when
Okay.
they let this out. In 2013 was when the former director of technical services came out and said, no, the story about the kitten getting hit and run over immediately is not true. It still failed. It still didn't work, but
Okay, but why would they ever let a story of like, oh, we killed the cat? Like that's like Curiosity killed the cat. Is that
right.
Like, how many times did they say that in The Office?
But like there's also that whole thing now that's just coming out, and the question, and there's another podcast we probably shouldn't name just because what have they given us? Just
Right.
$20. That's all I'm saying. Just drop it in the mail. That suggested that the CIA wrote at least part of the Scorpions' Winds of Change.
Right.
So,
I mean, the CIA is like sounding more and more fun. I mean, dead kittens, not good, but playing with cats all day, writing Scorpion songs, like
Beardless Castro,
power ballads, and kitty cats. Sounds a lot like the way I spent the early 2000s.
Right. I don't think hanging with the Scorpions is sort of their main thing. I feel like that's more of a tangential side project.
Probably.
Yeah. Because otherwise I would have been signing up and not doing this podcast.
Oh, you'd still do the podcast.
Oh, totally. I mean, if they want us to...
We'd find a way to make this a mission. This one has to have more logic than the cats.
So if anyone in the CIA is listening, I would just like to say, hello, CIA. Thank you for listening to our podcast. And we would love to help you out, whether it is if you have kittens that someone needs to dangle string or something shiny in front of them, if you need saucers of milk to be placed out, you have our numbers. Let us know.
One of us is very trainable, like a dog.
Yeah.
And one of us is
just going to run all over your yard.
One of us is an outdoor cat.
Yeah.
You can figure out which one is which.
Yeah. So, yeah,
we've written like of late we seem to have written like trivia about ourselves. Like which one of us?
Yeah, we have. Well, maybe that's something for a newsletter.
It could be. We could give something away.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a play on Newlywed, the new co-host game or something. I don't know what it is. Or maybe it's press your co-host. That sounds rude. I don't know.
I don't know. Could be.
Well, Wheel of Flash, I guess, is the easiest one.
Wheel of Flash is good.
And people have to figure out which one of us is which.
Yes.
Yeah, which one of us is the Cardi B? Which one is the Megan Thee Stallion?
I know, that's a tough one. It's one of the bigger dilemmas of the day.
And as soon as I said that, I'm like, well, which one is it?
Right? It is much more challenging than a lot of these.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be like, maybe it's not trivia. Maybe that one's a poll.
So
we can decide whose head goes on which one for the poster for The Office.
To start, how long has contraception existed in some form? I know you pick it up in the 1880s, but when did this really become a thing for people?
Oh, it's been a thing for 5,000 plus years. As long as there's been recorded history, there's been records of people trying to either prevent pregnancy or to try to encourage pregnancy. There's a great source that was written in the 1930s that it's called Medical History of Contraception by a man named Norman Himes. Himes traces all the possible means that people have used in the past, from crocodile dung mixed with honey to pieces of oiled paper to bits of cloth soaked in vinegar or in other substances, or different ways people have tried to wash themselves after sex has happened. And so a lot of sources that he found, go back really to the ancient Egyptians, 3000 BC. And it's really striking, like, in a way, it's kind of amusing that we can see, oh, crocodile dung mixed with honey, how disgusting. And on the other hand, we can see 5,000 years at least of people trying to control the ability of somebody to have birth or not.
No, don't knock it. Don't knock it till you've tried it.
I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna knock it.
I really want to do it bad. Really want to do it bad to bring out the crocodile.
Now, your book starts in 1882, and it's the title, A Concise History of Contraception, and it said that the modern contraceptive age began in 1882. Why did you pick that year as sort of the ground zero for your book and for looking forward?
Yeah. In 1882, there was a Dutch female physician called Aletta Jacobs. And in 1882, she opened a public clinic in Amsterdam where women could go without their husband's approval or even knowledge to get fitted with a diaphragm. And so a diaphragm, different forms of diaphragms have been around for a while, but she was using one that was developed originally by a German physician named Mensinga. And so if you see advertisements for these devices, they're called Mensinga pessaries, Mensingas. And they're kind of a rubber cap, basically, that had a watch spring around the rim, and it would fit over the cervix. They would adhere to the vaginal walls. And so a woman could put it in without her husband's knowledge, unless he was really vigorous. And believe me, I've read more complaints than I can count about feeling of bumping a penis into a diaphragm or a cervical cap. But she was the first person to make these devices available without a husband's consent or permission, and without a male medical authority involved. And so the clinic really only lasted about 12 or 13 years. It didn't have that many clients, but it did become famous in about 1914, 1915, when Margaret Sanger from the US was being persecuted for trying to open a birth control clinic in the US. She basically escaped persecution by taking a ship to Amsterdam and knocking on Aletta Jacobs's door and asking to learn how to fit diaphragms. And so really she would have been lost to history, or at least much more obscure, had Sanger not come to her. But that happens again about 20 years later. So I decided to date this, the modernity of contraception to 1882, even though it didn't affect that many people, even though many people didn't know about it, because it is a real moment when at least some women had the opportunity to get this device on their own.
With all your experience and research and conversations with people, why do you think contraception is still such a controversial subject in this day and age?
Really, it goes to a lot of the heart of both interpersonal relations between men and women, or people who identify in a non-binary way, and also at the same time what nations want from a particular population. And so it really kind of crosses boundaries from the immediately intimate. So if you and a partner are going to use something or not, or if you have access to something, if you can afford it, and so on. But the effects of availability of contraception are also important at the national level. And the nations have an interest in either promoting birth and promoting the increase in population, and they also have an interest in limiting populations for different reasons. And governments can restrict access to contraception, or they can make contraception required for certain activities. One example, is of course, in India in the late 1970s and during the emergency, that for about a period of about 24 months, you were required to provide proof of sterilization in order to get something like a bank loan. And that was actually directed mostly at men. And so there was a moment when the Indian government had an autocratic control over its citizens and was able to enforce a form of contraception against people's will. And so I think that's the reason that contraception across history has had such a really dramatic impact, is because you sense it on the personal level, but it's really dictated on a national or even a global level.
Is that one of the few instances you found where men were sort of responsible for things? So since it always seems, especially in these sorts of fields, that women don't necessarily get the upper hand or the easy way out of things.
There's a lot of push and pull between who is in control of contraception and why and what means they have. Because, of course, until you were able to get something like a diaphragm, contraception was totally in the man's hands. So I think even like men had a lot of control over whether they used withdrawal or a condom, or how good the condoms were, if they bought the nice ones or if they bought the only ones. And really the diaphragm and cervical cap are part of a movement, like a global birth control movement, to get some more control over contraception into the hands of women. It kind of it's a mixed bag, because diaphragms and cervical caps, they wear out very easily. They're kind of uncomfortable. You have to take them in and out, and you have to wash them and store them and so on. In tropical climates, they break quite easily. But really the turning point ends up being, of course, the birth control pill and other hormonal forms of contraception, because then birth control is basically invisible. And even though, of course, the pill has numerous side effects, which I can go into later, it's one advantage in a way, is that it is invisible. And someone who's in for example, an abusive relationship, can use it without a partner knowing. And so it does protect herself from unwanted pregnancy.
Why was this your next book? Why was this the area you wanted to head into? You've dedicated your career to exploring sexuality, which is a whole secondary question I have, but why was this the one you felt was important now?
I guess there's one practical reason and there's one kind of intellectual reason. The intellectual reason is that I wrote a book that came out in 2014 on Alfred Kinsey, and he, of course, wrote the Kinsey Reports, which came out 1948, 1953. And he really does not talk about contraception at all, except mentioning it in passing. And when I was studying his work, I didn't think too deeply about that as an omission. But as I was looking around for a new project, I went back to that work and I thought, contraception really does affect, especially how women have sex. Like if it's trustworthy contraception, if it's available, if a man is skilled in withdrawal or not, if she had access to a diaphragm or not, that really has a distinct impact on, not only her behavior, but also her pleasure and orgasm, and things like that. And so I thought, I bet this is a real missing piece, and I want to dig into this a little bit more. And so I started going to some different archives in the U.S., like University and Smith College, and they have amazing collections of contraceptive art materials in their archives, both physical objects and papers. And I thought, I'd really like to do something with all this. Uh, the practical reason is that I was at a history of technology conference in 2017 in September, and I was admiring this series that I published the book in. And the acquisitions editor there, said, why don't you write one of these things? And I thought, well, why not?
Yeah.
So kind of both the intellectual side and the practical side dovetailed into.
Excellent.
Sure.
So why was sexuality the path that you chose to devote your career to?
Really, it goes back to 2003 when I was a graduate student at Indiana University in Bloomington. And I was taking a class with the professor who became my advisor. Her name was Judith Allen. And it was the 50th anniversary of the publication of Kinsey's female volume, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. And he taught a class on the history of sex research. And I was just head over heels amazed by what there was out there. And having the Kinsey Institute itself on the Bloomington campus was an amazing advantage. And so I thought I could really write a whole PhD thesis about Kinsey's intellectual life. And also there was a conference that I ended up managing in October of that year where it was 200 or 300 sex researchers, historians, psychologists, sociologists came from all over the world, really, and all over the U.S. to present the latest research on history of sexuality, on the latest research on history of sexuality as well as on the present. And it was amazing to see like the top minds in the field all together. And I thought, this is not only the topic that I want to work with, but these are also the kind of people that I want to work with. And so things move forward from there.
That's awesome.
I would assume that the parties at a sex conference are pretty good, like the cocktail hours.
Yeah.
Like you're hanging out with a bunch of really smart.
You're never at a loss for conversation.
Yeah,
for sure.
Now, your 1880 start line, you get into in the 10s and the 20s and the 30s. You get into sort of some of the revivalism, the Kellogg theories on abstinence and various other things that seem incredibly strange and outdated and weird today. How much of that did you find in this field around that same time?
Oh, you mean like theories about nutrition and sex or abstinence?
Just, from your research, I was thinking, towards sort of the contraceptive angle. I mean, the stuff they were selling, the various pills and everything else for every other ailment under the sun. I'm assuming somebody tried to market something towards your field.
Yes. There is plenty of, there are plenty of charlatans in the world of birth control research and development, but not that many. I mean, I think the main thing that people tried to do was develop spermicides, because in the 20s and 30s, both in the U.S. and in particularly India, people were looking for, frankly, eugenic ways to control the population. And a lot of physicians thought, well, the diaphragm is, it's complicated, it's messy, it's expensive. Like, what can a inexpensive method of birth control be? And the pill was not yet on the horizon. And so people designed different kinds of douches or different kinds of spermicides. There was a physician in Florida called Lydia Allen de Vilbis, and she was developing spermicides that were just sulfates now. They're just soap. But she said that they impressed for people because they foamed. And so it kind of would look like something was happening. It would feel like something is happening because it was stinging them, but it's actually doing much of anything. So, and then we see, in Japan, there are different methods with putting a piece of oiled paper over the cervix and then trying to see if people will, take that on. Douches made of vinegar, or, it is true that women were encouraged to use Lysol and other really harsh household disinfectants. And again, if you didn't know, you'd think, oh, it stings so badly.
Right.
This is so effective. But of course, what they do is actually just damage the vagina and actually make it easier for sperm to get in on irritated tissues.
Because that would make a great tagline. The stinging means it works. It's working.
Yes. Pay no attention to that misery. That means things I
just
feel
imagine
like
a doctor sitting there smoking, telling you the stinging means it works. Yeah.
when a lot of these crazy things, I feel like the whole process takes all the fun out of it. So that becomes the actual contraception, because I'm like, nope, it hurts like hell down there. You're not coming anywhere near me. So nope.
Right.
We're just watching Netflix. Yeah.
Right. And now obviously you travel all over the world. And I know you're currently based in Germany. What have you found are the perceptions from country to country that you're experiencing? So as far as Germany to here, from our knowledge base of current contraception and our misconceptions of contraception.
Basically, how uptight are Americans compared to the world?
Yeah.
Well, some are more uptight than others. I think it's fair. I would say it's quite unusual. Coming from the U.S., living in Germany, the attitudes towards sex are quite different, and just in terms of contraceptive technology or birth control availability, it's quite easy to order materials online from a medical supply source, or to go to a physician and get a prescription for hormonal birth control. It's quite unproblematic to do that. And then on a side note, more, it's quite, I don't want to say it's easy to get an abortion, but it's not as politicized as it is in the US. And there's still a procedure that you have to go through before you can have a physician perform one or get the pills for one. But abortion as a political issue just simply doesn't exist here. The availability is not taken for granted, really, but just part of everyday. I don't want to say that either. Abortion is part of everyday health care in a way that it's not in the U.S. So.
How often do your friends try to use you as a sex coach or a sex therapist as opposed to researcher, expert in that part of the field?
Happened a little more when I was teaching more sex-related material, and I was working on the Kinsey material, because Alfred Kinsey has an instant association with sexual behavior. And weirdly, contraception doesn't have as much of a direct association with sex, even though that's the only circumstance under which you would want it.
Yeah.
And so my shoulder to cry on is a little dry.
Well, enjoy the break. It'll be back.
And something I found in my research, and that I love in the sort of the digging and the going through the archives of stuff, is the stuff you get to see and the stuff you get to touch. Mm-hmm. What did you get to see and what did you get to touch?
Probably the highlight of researching for this book was going to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. And they have a entire medicine and science materials collection, a lot of which is online. but not all of it. And the staff there, you know, they have a huge list of you know, all kinds of, you know, diaphragms and spermicides, and they have IUDs, and they even have Dalcon shields, which were of course deadly in some cases. They had pill boxes from around the world, and it was just absolutely fascinating to see the different ways that birth control or contraception has been packaged and sold and lie to women about its efficacy, and through the years. It's been just watching the museum technician or the curator open the drawer with all the contraception materials in it. I was just like, please leave me alone and let me play now.
Right.
But I was well supervised and worked.
Donna's book, Contraception, A Concise History, is available from the MIT Press. It's part of their Essential Knowledge series, and it's available wherever you get books. You can also find Donna on Twitter, where she's at hist, H-I-S-T, of sex.
Be sure to follow Why the Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check out our YouTube channel for some additional great Why content. If you're so inclined, please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant executive producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our graphic designer is Samantha Mustonen. Our intern is Randy Jeanette. The theme song was performed by the Electrosyntho-Magnetic Polyphonic Orchestra. This one's for Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Flash, we're coming home.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?